Welcome to Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A. I'm your host, Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute. And we're thrilled to have you joining us this week for our weekly Q&A show, where each week I tackle a handful of the biggest sales and marketing challenges that we're hearing about from all over the global data center, digital infrastructure, and critical facilities ecosystem. This includes data center operators such as colocation, hyperscale, edge, modular, and wholesale data center providers, as well as the dozens of different kinds of data center technology companies and data center facilities related companies in and around the ecosystem, plus construction, real estate, and investors in and around data centers and digital infrastructure, as well as the vibrant outsourced sales and marketing ecosystem in and around data centers, critical facilities, and digital infrastructure. And this weekly live show, Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A, is for you regardless of what your individual role is, your job function is on the go-to-market team. Perhaps you work in some facet of sales, such as an account executive, an AE, or an SDR, or a BDR, a business development rep, or sales development rep, or maybe you work in post-sales as like an account manager, an AM, or a CSM, like a client success manager, or something similar to that. Or perhaps you are responsible for some facet of marketing, like events marketing, field marketing, content, demand generation, paid, perhaps product marketing or product management, responsible for meeting with customers and figuring out what your company should be building next. And if your company has both a direct and an indirect playbook, you may be responsible for channel partnerships in some kind of role, like as a channel account manager or channel consultant or something similar to that. Or maybe you are the executive sponsor that's responsible for going out into the marketplace and recruiting the best and brightest to give you and your team and your company the best possible chances of success, the best talent, the best team, the best culture to capitalize on this incredible period of growth within the data center ecosystem. If this is the first time that you're joining us for Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A, welcome. We are thrilled to have you with us. Please take a moment and let us know in the comments what you do and what your company does in the data center industry. We would love to know. And if you've been with us before, if you're joining us for second, third, fourth time, if you're a frequent flyer, welcome back. We are thrilled to have you with us as well. If you want to make sure that you get invited to upcoming educational events and you learn about educational resources just like this, make sure that you subscribe to our Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter from DCSMI. You can do so directly on our website at www.dcsmi.com. And that way you get notified direct to your email inbox on Sundays. So what is on the agenda for this week's show? First, we're going to look at how to modernize your data center sales and lead generation strategies. It's one of the biggest challenges that we hear about throughout the data center industry, lead generation. How to attract high quality data center leads by creating premium content. How to engage data center decision committees, decision makers, and the decision committee as a whole by leveraging educational events. That'll put us right at a halfway point for this week's show, and we'll take a real quick break for a message from our sponsor. And in the second half of this week's show, we'll talk about how to create a data center lead generation strategy for mid-market and enterprise clients. Then we'll turn our attention to closing sales faster, in particular, how we can close sales faster with our data center leads using trust building strategies. And as we head down the home stretch and get ready to land the plane on this week's show, we'll talk about how to integrate data center content marketing and educational events for much better lead generation. If you have an idea for a topic or a challenge that you're facing, either individually, among your team, among your company, or some other kind of big picture goal related to sales marketing and go-to-market that you think would make an amazing topic to address on a future show, be sure to leave that in the comments wherever you're watching, and we will add that to the consideration queue of topics to address in future episodes. So without any further delay, let's jump right into this week's first question, which is, How do we modernize data center sales and lead generation strategies? How do we modernize our strategies for data center sales and lead generation? That is a fantastic question and a great place to start, because we are now in an era where there's two very fundamental changes going on in the industry. One is as a result of generative AI and NVIDIA's GPUs and everything related to artificial intelligence and high performance computing and eventually supercomputing now taking front and center stage. The growth in power requirements in traditional colocation and hyperscale and edge data centers is grown exponentially in the last few years, and it shows no signs of slowing down anytime soon. The only thing seemed to holding it back is utility grid supply. And we see a lot of innovations in alternate energy that are helping to have more self-generating data centers online to potentially address that seeming limit to capacity and growth among data centers and digital infrastructure. But in addition to all of that insane hockey stick kind of growth going on, that pretty much all has the same root cause, is the land rush, the gold, whatever you want to call it, that stems from the insane amount of demands, especially starting with the hyperscalers, but filtering on down to the right of the industry that all has largely generative AI and training models, which will eventually filter into inference and eventually be even more edge relevant. But right now, we're just facing a very, very basic constraint on can't build it fast enough, can't get power fast enough. The existing facilities can't keep up with power and heating demands. That's why liquid cooling is seeing such great interest and demand for that as well right now. But in addition to all of those IT related issues and engineering related issues that are going on in the data center industry, your buyers have changed a lot over the last 5 or 10 years. And it's not just that they're focused on all of these high density initiatives, is that the way they interact with teams like yours has fundamentally changed. If we were talking about this 10 years ago, it was very common to find that in the relatively early days of search and mobile adoption and cloud and public SaaS, and at that time, about 10 years ago, most of your typical buyers for data centers and digital infrastructure, they'd get about halfway through their research and decision-making process, doing all of these searches, asking their colleagues for advice on LinkedIn, reading online reviews, watching YouTube videos, attending webinars, listening to podcasts, maybe going to some conferences. They'd get about halfway through and then it'd be like, okay, I've taken this as far as I can. Now I am ready to schedule the tour, to book the needs assessment, to talk to sales. At the time, CEB, the corporate executive board that's now owned by Gartner, did some really seminal research with Salesforce and SiriusDecisions. And they found that about 56, 57% of a typical journey was over before you got to meet the prospect, before you got to meet your future potential client, which seemed like being left out for a big part of that process. But at least you were still in there for the last 43, 44% of their research and decision making. So you could still ask some questions, share how others in similar job roles and similar kind of companies were addressing this big goal or this big challenge, and have a rational conversation with them about best practices and how to evaluate the different options that are in front of them. Add 10 years of digital transformation, a lot of change in demographics, a lot of baby boomers retiring, a lot more Gen Z and millennials in decision-making roles. Tens of millions of people got used to working from home in the beginning of the 2020s. And that number, that 56, 57% number from 10 years ago, has jumped all the way to 83%, and it's continuing to accelerate rapidly to the right, meaning that by the time you meet a prospect now, by the time you meet a future client, they are almost ready to buy. It's as if 80, 85, 90% of the game is over before they even let you into the arena, before they even let you into the stadium. And it's really, really hard to be competitive, to explain what your company does better than everyone else in the marketplace when someone else has really dramatically shaped the criteria that they're using to evaluate your category. It's like you're completely absent from the game. Imagine, we'll go down the sports analogies rabbit hole a little bit because we started that already, but it doesn't matter whether you're a football fan, soccer fan, basketball fan, baseball fan. Games are all divided up into sections, right? There's quarters, there's periods, there's innings if you like baseball. Again, imagine the scenario where all of the other teams that you compete with are allowed into the arena, either because they're on the field or they're hanging out in your corporate box or in the section of seats where all your prospects and clients and channel partners are sitting. And they're all schmoozing them like crazy. And for whatever reason, your team, maybe you seem a little bit too salesy, they don't want to let you in until the game is almost over. And by that point, your chance to get a word in edgewise, your chance to shape the outcome of the decision that those prospects or clients or channel partners are going to make has been vastly, vastly impacted by someone else that you compete with owning nearly all of the surface area. So in this new competitive battleground with the self-driven buyer's journey, which it may seem a little new to the data center industry, but IT buyers have been clamoring for this for well over 8-10 years or so, starting in SaaS, software as a service, and really, really picking up momentum coming into the mid-2020s. So in this world, it's more important than ever to get you in early and to get you in often. Because in the self-driven journey, by default, they don't want to talk to anyone that seems salesy or marketer-ish or anything remotely close to that. But even when it comes to the most highly technical, super skeptical, cynical, sales allergic IT professionals and engineers, they still have to keep their skills sharp. They still need to learn how to do their jobs better. They're still constantly in the market for professional development and learning and development. So the key with all of this is to reframe how you, your sales team, your marketers, your product managers, your account managers look and the value proposition in the eyes of your prospects and clients. That's why we're seeing such a unmistakable shift in hiring preferences among companies in the data center industry to now hire subject matter experts into business development, into commercial roles at a very, very much more rapid pace than they ever have before in anything that I've seen. In other words, it's now become a lot more common for a career IT professional that's never worked on a biz dev team, a career engineer, a career IT operations person that's never worked on a biz dev team, to be the ultimate power hire to join that business development team. Why? Because they understand the buyers, they have street credibility with the buyers, and they can have great conversations with the prospects and clients as their peers, not as someone that's an account executive or an account manager in or a marketer, but as their peers. So going forward, what does this mean? Does it mean you need to change the job title that's on your business card and your email signature and on your LinkedIn profile? Oh, that's part of it. But the reality is the transformation to keep you in the game, to keep you relevant, large, and get you out of the vendor box and keep you out of the vendor box is largely all about transforming your sales strategy, transforming your lead generation strategy to look a lot more like teaching, consulting, being a subject matter expert, being seen as a trusted advisor. That trusted advisor is so incredibly important. And some of the most senior members on your team with the most experience, they will likely be seen as thought leaders when you take this kind of initiative seriously. And based on the general direction of what's going on in the marketplace, if you're thinking that your prospects and your clients are different, they don't buy that way, I would encourage you to do your homework, do your customer insight research, because to find people that are in charge of a digital transformation project around like digital infrastructure or liquid cooling or cybersecurity or asset disposition, any one of the dozens of common initiatives in and around the data center ecosystem, at the time and place where we are on the calendar to look around and find that you're going to have an internal champion who doesn't have a smartphone, who's never logged on to LinkedIn, who's never watched a YouTube video, who's never attended a webinar, who's never asked dozens of questions to ChatGPT to help them do their job better, I don't know who you think you're selling to. You know, I'm on the young-ish side of Gen X, and all of the baby boomers that I know in the data center industry that are still working In a lot of cases, they're working more as part-time advisors or consultants, but even the ones, regardless of whether they're working full-time, still going at the same intensity that they have throughout their entire career, whether they've slowed down a little bit. Every single one that I'm close to are super active on LinkedIn. They watch podcasts. They're in demand to be guests on podcasts. They watch webinars. They're in demand to speak at webinars. They're for certain in demand to speak at conferences. And if you want to tell how digitally connected they are, when you see someone speaking at a conference that you can tell is kind of in the later stages of their career, like 30, 40 years of experience, and they have an amazing slide, and you take a picture of that slide and you share it on LinkedIn and you add a few sentences about why you love that point that they made about high density airflow or rethinking how we measure PUE or whatever it is, like, and you mention that individual, you'd be shocked how quickly they come off stage and they finish talking to the long line of people waiting to chat with them after that talk. Within a matter of minutes, they're hitting the like button and saying, it was so great that you were able to attend our talk today. Like within minutes, that's how digitally connected they are. It's their second inbox. It's their second CRM. So when it comes to like your sales strategy, when it comes to figuring out how to improve your lead generation, to modernize, to be better aligned with how your prospects and clients and your channel partners are all researching and making your purchase decisions, this really re-ups the ante on what it takes for you to reinvent yourself to stay relevant. So we see a lot more people that are in career IT roles working for data center operators that are now investing in the same exact training and certification credentials that their prospects and clients have. Why? Because they need to. They need to have the skills. They need to have the credibility to be able to have better, trusted conversations with these prospects and clients. No one needs you to read the website to them anymore. They don't need you to read the slides to them anymore. There used to be career roles of people that did like voiceovers and stuff. And I guess there is still to a certain degree, but we're now in the era where most people know that there's a button in the browser or on the website that'll read the website to them or read the slides to them. They don't need that anymore. If all you're doing, if that's your value, this is maybe painful to hear, but this is the path forward. This is why your professional development, you're reinventing yourself, you're upskilling, you're cross-training. Hopefully you have a director, vice president, manager, you have a boss, mentor who is encouraging you and helping to guide you towards that path and reinforcing and providing support, both time and financial, or a little bit of both, to point you in that direction of helping you reinvent yourself to stay relevant, both that helps your career and helps your team and helps the company. But if not, if you're working for someone that's a little more clueless about this or really selfish about this, and this is your career, we are talking about your livelihood. And if you really are self-aware about what your prospects and clients are demanding, even if your employer doesn't want to pay $1 or a pound or a rand or a euro to support this, even if they don't want to give you an hour over the course of the entire year for your own professional development, this is an existential threat to your career. So I would encourage you, even if you have the biggest jerk of a boss or selfish employer who all they care about is closing, and could care less about your career trajectory or keeping you relevant or providing value, find the time, even if there's no budget. And the reality is most people have a lot more time to invest in this than they realize. Like, for example, if you have 2 hours a day of commuting, that's 30 or 40 hours a month. Now, you may be driving. I'm certainly not telling you to do anything that would be unsafe to be driving. You can listen to audio for a lot of this training, and you don't necessarily always need to be watching the screen when it's not safe to be watching the screen. What I call this is being able to listen somewhat passively, where you get like 70 or 80% of the value listening, and then you go back when you can pay more attention when you're sitting at your desk or sitting in the break room or sitting in your home office in the evening, and you watch it 150% or 200% or whatever it is, or you just flip through the slides to review that. That's during commuting time. Obviously, if you're commuting on mass transit, you have other options. Heck knows in the data center industry, there are thousands of people who are on a first name basis with the TSA agent at their home airport and spend, I don't know, what is at least 25, 30 big trips over the course of the year. So you're spending a lot of time waiting in airport lounges. You're spending a lot of time flying around. Most airlines now have Wi-Fi. So there's a lot of ways for you to be able to get a couple dozen hours a year, 30, 40, 50 hours a year to be able to consume this kind of training. Besides commuting, besides travel, if you do any kind of workout, if you go for a run, if you go for a walk, if you go for a bike, if you like the elliptical, if you like the treadmill, whatever it is, and you can at least listen, not even necessarily being able to watch, but at least listen to the audio. Again, you'll likely get 70 or 80% of the value and then go back what you can actually watch on the screen. If you're not able to watch on the screen the first time through, maybe you just look at the slides or go through at 150% or whatever it is. But the big message with all of this is reskilling is incredibly important. We started to notice in some of the podcast interviews that I would do for the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast about a year or two ago, sales executives and CEOs of small to mid-size co-location operators were talking about setting up these home computer labs so they could basically run like a micro data center in their home office, presumably using the hand-me-down equipment from their employer so that they could keep their skills sharp. Again, if you want your prospects and clients to see you as a peer and in a self-driven journey where they're trying very, very actively to use ChatGPT to make you irrelevant, being able to be there as a peer will save your career. Huge, huge part of saving your career. So the question is, what can you do to take action, both from a sales strategy and a lead generation perspective, to prepare yourself to be able to educate and build trust with your most important prospects and clients early and often. Right now, by default, most companies in this ecosystem are going berserk with over-investing in events where they have very, very little control over being able to educate and build trust their core audience. In fact, at most conferences, like 3% of the people that go to a conference are in a position where they can actually do education and trust building with the audience. The other 97%, they're the audience. Maybe 20 of that 97% are there to babysit a booth where there's no time to educate and build trust most of the time. And the rest is just the core audience. Without you being there, there is no conference. So what I'm extraordinarily concerned about for you is if you're spending all of your time in a place where you have very, very little opportunity to educate and build trust, how are you actually going to educate and build trust with your prospects and clients that are most important to building productive pipeline, to building successful, high quality leads that will mature into great clients and retain over time as fantastic future sources of revenue for your employer? When you're so distracted that all of your time is in an environment where you're just chasing people around and having drinks and socializing with your peers, like, where are you finding the time to actually do this? There's very, very high opportunity costs on sitting this out, because make no mistake, if they can't find the answers from you, they're going to find the answers from someone. And by default, you know who your biggest indirect competitor is right now, or at least non-business model competitor right now? ChatGPT and Copilot and Gemini and Perplexity and Claude and Grok. Why is it your single biggest non-business model competitor? Because the mother of instant gratification is right there for any possible answer, that conversation that they would have traditionally had with a account executive or a marketer or an account manager or client success person or solutions engineer in the past. So what do you do to get in early so you're a significant factor in generating leads and educating and building trust in the first 83%, in the full buyer's journey? It's super, super important that we get really dialed into our ideal client profile, that we know our buyer persona's goals and challenges better than they know them themselves. And then we rethink what it means to participate in a significant way in events. If you're routinely spending huge amounts of your calendar and huge amounts of your budget on events where there's a very low match rate between their demographics and your ideal client profile and your target buyer personas, I rethink whether that's a good use of your time and schedule and budget to be able to chase an audience where there's very low single digits or relatively low amounts of match between that particular audience and your particular audience. If on the other hand, there's a high match rate and you have a chance to educate and build trust, that is a pretty good use of your time. But for most people that are in that core 97, where they're showing up to these massive events and they're not getting to educate and build trust, I'll tell you without a doubt that hosting your own events in your classroom, in your conference room, on your webinar, on your live stream, however you're going to host them with the perfect people from your target accounts in a way that you can educate and build trust with them about the topics, the goals, the challenges that are on their front burner right now in a way that positions you and your colleagues, your team members, as some of the smartest people on the planet when it comes to anything and everything having to do with those biggest goals and challenges. That is incredibly important. And that is the new competitive battleground. And this is not one and done. They're going to typically go through 25 to 30 touch points between complete stranger and purchase decision. So this isn't like we try this once and if we didn't get it perfect, we stop doing this. No, we literally need to understand their 10 or 12 biggest goals and challenges, because over the next 10 or 12 months, we keep inviting them back to month 1, to month 2, to month 3, where every single month we're working down the list, and one big topic at a time, we're bringing in 1 or 2 subject matter experts from our team, and we're presenting world-class, incredibly valuable educational experiences, professional development and learning and development. And when we do this right, and we're focusing on inviting people from our target account list that are in the bullseye of our ideal client profile, and we focus on those prioritized buyer personas, it is a very, very likely scenario that when you say they register and you send back the confirmation email with who else should attend, hey, when we know when it comes to cybersecurity best practices for mid-market manufacturing IT executives, we know it takes a village. This is truly a team effort. Usually there's people involved from support, from engineering, from operations, from compliance, from finance. Given that, who else from your team, from other teams in your organization would benefit from attending? Simply hit the forward button, add a thought or two on why this matters, and we know that teams that learn together grow together. That's simple email marketing automation that 95% of your peers are completely dropping the ball on. And frankly, you've been able to do that in most MarTech and most marketing technology and email programs for at least 20 years at this point. That is incredibly important and incredibly valuable, because that's what fills up your audience with 2, 3, 4 people from the same company, which is the beginning of you starting to get significant coverage area on the decision committee and proactively driving alignment in the formative stages of the buyer's journey, where you're in a position to be able to shape the criteria that they use to evaluate the different options that are in your category. And you'll know this is working exceptionally well, because by the time you get to month 2 and month 3 and month 4, you start to notice that, that's interesting. On month 1, there were 2 people from this account. By month 3, there's like 5 people from the same account. They keep coming back, and they're bringing more of their colleagues, and they brought their boss. This is the value of educate and build trust. And the cool part is your CFO and your board of directors will love this part. You can run these events for a tiny, tiny fraction of what it costs to schlep your whole team to the other side of the country, the other side of the planet, for these big global conferences where there is an enormous loss factor relative to your ideal client profile and demographics most of the time. You know what it costs to run a breakfast seminar or a lunch and learn in your classroom or conference room? Well, unless there's some internal wonky chargeback system, the cost of using the room is probably likely free. You already have a CRM and an email marketing program, I assume already. So the cost of sending out some messages is some planning time with a sales enablement or a marketing person to figure out what the topics and what should go in the email and the registration landing page. I'm not trivializing that. That's certainly a couple of days of work each time there's an event to set this all up and promote it and get together with the subject matter expert and build the deck. The key thing is, if you've never done this before, the first couple times through, there's definitely some learning curve. As you do it more often, you'll get more efficient at it. You'll get better results. Like most things, the first time you try to run a mile, it's very painful. It's very slow. By the 10th time or the 100th time you've tried to run a mile, you're better at it. You're faster at it. You're not cramping. You don't feel like you want to keel over afterwards. It's the same thing with running your own events. But again, what your CFO, anyone who cares about budget and efficiency and return on investment is going to absolutely love is your cost to run these things are like next to nothing. What does it cost to bring in coffee and donuts and some fruit in the morning? What does it cost to bring in some pizza or some deli sandwiches for lunch or something like that? For a room of 20 or 30 people, in the US, this will be a few $100s. You'd be hard pressed to spend more than 1,000 or 2,000 even if you really tried unless you went crazy on some fancy catering or something like that. But if you're trying to stay low budget, high impact, this is like off the charts. And the best part is it's the right people from the right company, most of all in the right context where you're getting to educate and build trust. This is not an infomercial. If they get there and they feel like it's an infomercial, if it's a nonstop sales pitch, they may not be rude and like walk out of that, but they're not coming back and they're bringing their boss. So you need to make sure that every single person in the room is going to feel like that time was extremely well spent, that they learn a ton of best practices about other people in similar job functions and similar companies in your region, at companies of similar size, address this very goal, address this very challenge, and you become an integral part of them coming back over and over and over again to be part of their learning and development, to be part of their professional development process. Now, how does this move from being the teacher, the consultant, to commercializing this? It's actually pretty straightforward. If you talk for 35, 40 minutes, leave 5 minutes at the end to talk about how you help companies like this, maybe share a live case study. If it's for example, if you have a co-location facility, super natural thing for anyone that's interested to offer to take them on a tour. If you're in the generator business, for anyone that wants to come out to wherever you're going to demo the generator, to liquid cooling, whatever you're in, like that's when it shifts a little bit from sharing extremely valuable best practices in professional development to talking a little bit about yourself. And when I say a little bit, it should be 95% over delivering value and about 5 to 10%, 5 or 10 minutes at the absolute most, talking about how wonderful your company is and all your award-winning competitive stuff and all the things that people would like to talk about if they were in the last 5 or 10% of their journey. Because most people are not in the last 5 to 10% of the journey. We are there primarily to train them to know that when they and their colleagues get to that last 5 to 10%, that they've spent so much time learning about best practices and methodologies and how to evaluate all the different options in front of them, that they will know for sure, one, this keeps you on the short list. Second, it nearly guarantees that you stay on the short list. And when you do an amazing job with this, your competitive options that they're looking at will start to disappear from their short list. So by the time they are in market, by the time they're ready for a sales conversation, you will many times discover that that short list has shrunk down drastically. And in some cases, shrinks down to a short list of one company, your company, because they've realized by the time you've taken them through all of these different exercises and best practices and methodologies and how to evaluate and what this looks like post-implementation and the right questions to be asked, they may discover pretty quickly that the other guys are coming up way too short, and your company is the most rational option. And they love how friendly, resourceful, insightful your team members are that they've been seeing speak. By the way, the one thing that a lot of people bring up is if you're a relatively small company and you exhaust your internal subject matter experts, but there's still topics they're curious about, what should you do? Well, no one says that in your monthly Lunch and Learn, your monthly webinar series for that particular buyer persona, that every single speaker needs to be an employee of your company. Some could be channel partners, some could be contractors, some could be a subject matter expert from a vendor. You could have a panel that you moderate of clients, of customers, of channel partners, whatever provides value to that specific person. And that's the key with all of this. It's not about providing value to you and serving your selfish lead generation and commercial sales interest. It's about providing value to them. Because remember, they're coming in as hyper skeptical, hyper cynical, sales allergic IT professionals or engineers or whoever else it is that you're selling to. You're immediately treading water. The only way you're going to start to win them over is to educate and build trust. The moment you violate that expectation by jumping prematurely into a sales pitch, or essentially like a marriage proposal, you erode that trust. So think about what it takes to be able to provide world-class professional development and learning and development in roughly the same proximity and roughly the same time frame for roughly the same kind of people that used to come to you for sales conversations, because they don't want to have one-on-one sales conversations anymore until they're almost ready to buy. But we really very badly need that surface area, not only in the last 17%, but in the full 83%. The companies that do a masterful job of showing up early and often and educating and building trust are the ones that are going to win the business. The ones that keep trying to run sales and lead generation as if it's still the 2010s or earlier are going to struggle mightily and may face existential threats to their company's survival. If you have the good fortune to work for the category leader in your particular industry, if you work for a Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 company that has insane levels of brand recognition, this playbook is already being run at scale. Nearly every large company runs this to a certain degree. Where I see a lot of people in this industry getting screwed up is they spend way too much time chasing the competitor that's 100 or 1,000 times larger than them. And as a result, they get incredibly distracted and they never get around to doing this, which is a shame because it's so much less time consuming. It's so much less expensive. It's so much more precise with the right people in the room at the right time for the right reasons. And if you have 3 or 4 buyer personas and there's 3 or 4 weeks in the month and you have a reasonably cooperative company culture that supports this, that's the key thing, is your CEO needs to support this initiative. If you're from a relatively small company, like up to a few hundred employees, obviously, if you're Fortune 1000 company, the CEO is not going to get involved in internal championing your breakfast seminar or webinar series. But if you're from a company that has 75 employees, 150 employees, 300 employees, CEO and the CRO and chief commercial need to get to the point that, like, we're tired of our salespeople being treated like crap. We're tired of the condescension. We're tired of being lied to. We're tired of being ghosted to. We're better than that. We have some of the smartest experts in our category on the planet. It is time to let the industry know about what we have that is so special in a way that allows us to take our education and trust building directly to our most important buyer personas and our most important accounts. No gatekeepers, no toll takers, no weird conflicts of interest, no pretending that we're actually lead generating when we're actually just socializing with our buddies. No, we're going to take it directly to the people that are most important to educate and build trust with. And we're going to look a lot more like teachers and consultants and subject matter experts, trusted advisors, maybe even thought leaders than we ever have in the past to get us out of the vendor box and keep us out of the vendor box once and for all. So that's what I'd be thinking about for a company in and around the data center industry that is looking to modernize its data center sales strategy, and its lead generation strategy. If you're enjoying this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show so far, make sure that you help to spread the word by hitting the like button on whatever platform that you're watching. If you're listening on a audio platform after and you want to be able to help spread the word, for sure, rate us and review that. We would love that as well. So what is up next? Next topic for today is how do we attract high quality data center leads by creating premium content? And if you work in sales or as an account manager, I would give you permission almost to ignore those last 3 words if it's going to cause you to shut down, because a lot of people in sales roles and in account management type of roles, when they hear content, they immediately think, oh, that's marketing's job. They'll figure out all the content thing. Leave me alone. I just want the leads. And that worked 10 years ago. Doesn't work so well today. And I'll tell you why. So again, the question is, how do we attract high quality data center leads by creating premium content? So in a buyer's journey, with the preferences that now most IT professionals and engineers and other key stakeholders in the data center industry go through when they're planning any kind of major initiative, most of the heavy lifting they're now going to do in terms of figuring things out before you ever get to meet that prospecting client. And at first instinct, you may think, well, that's good. Let them go figure it out and only come to me when they're serious and ready to buy. But in today's world, that's actually the kiss of death. Why? Because 80, 85, sometimes 90, 95% of their research and decision-making is over before you get to meet them. That means that they're doing tons of searches. They're having tons of conversations with ChatGPT and Copilot and Perplexity and Gemini, and they're figuring all this stuff out. They're watching webinars. They're listening to podcasts. They're going to reading reviews. They're asking questions of their peers on LinkedIn. They're figuring all this stuff out by the time they get to you. And as a result, someone else is shaping the criteria that they use to evaluate your category. It doesn't matter whether you're in facilities like doing liquid cooling or decommissioning, or whether you're in data center technology doing something like storage or cybersecurity, or whether you're a data center operator like edge or colocation or hyperscale, or maybe you're a general contractor or a site planning expert or architect, or it doesn't matter which of these categories you're in. Nearly all buyers today strongly prefer to bypass traditional sales. That's part of the reason why generative AI usage is going crazy. It's all about empowerment and self-service. And we know that accelerated quite dramatically in the early 2020s when tens of millions of people got used to being a lot more independent and working from home. We know as there's been generational shifts from passing the torch from baby boomers and Gen X and a lot more Gen Z and a lot more millennials in decision-making roles, that has only accelerated quite dramatically. So in a world where there's all of these big changes, a lot of times your content and your educational events are taking the place of what used to happen in one-on-one conversations. Because that whole idea that like the journey is almost over before you meet a prospect, 10 years ago, it wasn't over nearly completely. It was like half over. In the 2010s, 56, 57% over. Today, like at least 83% over. That's a really, really big change. It used to be 10 years ago, you were there for almost half of the decision-making process. Today, you're hardly there at all. So what do we use to get our footing back in the door? A lot of people are very confused and they think they can bribe their prospects. So they want to take them to the Super Bowl or the World Series, or take them out on a yacht, or take them to Bali or Cannes or Honolulu. They want to do some crazy show of hospitality that they hope wins them their loyalty. Well, the reality is, for anyone that works for any kind of government entity, if they take a big enough bribe, you'll probably be visiting them in inmate fatigues, and possibly yourself. I'm not going to go down the path of giving you advice on that. Talk to your own legal counsel on the legalities of how much you can bribe an IT professional or engineer before the lavish trip to the resort was actually considered over the top. But like, yeah, taking them and having a great party, inviting them to a ball game, most of the time is not going to tip those scales. But the reality is, in most of those contexts, like the end game with all of this is to educate and build trust. Educate and build trust. So how can we put ourselves in a position where we can consistently educate and build trust with the right people in the right places at the right time, and most of all in the right context, so that they see you as an expert and a trusted advisor, a teacher, consultant, maybe even a thought leader? Well, there's a couple of different ways to do this. One of them for sure is premium content. What premium content has historically meant is that the content is so good that you can put a form in front of it and generate a lead. So essentially, instead of paying with their credit card, paying with their wallet to access that content, they're paying with a little bit of their information. Essentially, it's like they're giving you their business card in return for access to a downloadable report, or a ebook, or a white paper, or an on-demand webinar, or an interactive tool, or something like that. So the offline analogy that's existed for decades is, imagine that your CTO or your founder wrote a book on what every mid-market hospital CTO needs to know about cybersecurity or something like that. And at your booth at the conference, you decide that any qualified CTO that comes by the booth while supplies last can trade their business card for an autographed copy of the book. Well, what premium content is doing is kind of like the next best thing, except instead of them getting the physical book and it getting autographed, they're getting like the PDF version of the book or something similar. So that's the basic idea with premium content, is that it's providing so much value in the eye of the beholder, not you. You don't get to judge the value. It's all about how they value that particular content, that it's so good that you can ask for a little bit of data. Some people go overboard on data. I'm not a big fan of insisting on getting a phone number from someone on an ebook download. Probably a little more appropriate if they're like scheduling a tour to come in and visit your facility. But like, the proportionality of the number of the fields and how aggressive you are at capturing information on the fields should be proportional to the perceived value of the offer. A 4-page downloadable checklist doesn't have the same value as a 50-page ebook, and a 50-page ebook doesn't have the same value as a lunch and learn event, and a lunch and learn event doesn't have the same value as a 2-day symposium. Like, as the value escalates, as the value increases, typically you can collect more information that helps you better qualify, better segment, all those things that marketing, operations, sales enablement folks like to geek out on in terms of figuring out like fit to your ICP, to your ideal client profile and intent, and like how quickly to route the particular lead into who. So in terms of like attracting high quality data center leads by creating premium content, if we were having this talk like 10 years ago in a world where before generative AI, where you just simply competing against like YouTube and LinkedIn and Google searches, like it was a little different. Today, your premium content needs to actually be better than the quality of the conversation than someone's going to have by talking about the same topic on one of their favorite generative AI chat tools. So let's say, for example, you're in the liquid cooling business or the decommissioning business or the cybersecurity business or the site selection business. As you are looking at your primary and your secondary buyer persona, and you're synthesizing as you're figuring out their biggest goals and challenges, and you're using that to draft the outline for your premium content, take the same query and ask Copilot or Gemini or ChatGPT like about the same topic, and make sure that your premium content is better. Because if it's not, you're not competing in the modern battleground of how you need to compete to stay relevant, to stay in the game, and to make your prospects and clients actually want to spend a significant amount of time with the author or the author's team that produced that premium content. So again, in terms of attracting high quality leads by creating premium content, it's this mindset shift of recognizing that we are now locked outside of the stadium for the first 83% of the game. And the only way that we're going to earn our way back in is by professional development, by learning and development, by educating and building trust. And with that mindset, there is no room for being selfish jerks anymore. We can't be pompous. We can't be arrogant. We can't talk about how wonderful we are. We can't flex our certifications and our credentials, because you know what? Your boss loves that shit. Sorry. Your boss loves that stuff. Your board loves that stuff. Your buddies, your coworkers love that stuff. You know who doesn't like that? You know who thinks it doesn't do anything for them? Prospects and clients that pay the bills. Prospects and clients that pay the bills. They're the ones that get to decide whether your premium content is worth the form fill or whether it's just the bad stereotypical definition of bad marketing. And there's a lot of bad marketing. There's a lot of very, very selfish, completely tone deaf marketing going on in this industry right now for a variety of reasons. But if we want to be truly client centric, it is incredibly important that we know at the company level who we're producing this for, nail down that ICP, that ideal client profile, know where they're located, how big or small their company is, know the industry that it's in. And when we create this premium content, have a very specific buyer persona in mind and their goals and challenges and where they are in their journey with your company. Are they at the very early stages where they have no idea that your company exists and there's just some big goals or some big challenges that they're trying to figure out? Or at the really late stages where they've narrowed down their solution approach and they're looking at specific companies? Or is it somewhere in between? So being able to cover that full journey is so incredibly important, because there's a very, very high likelihood that no human from your company is getting in there before the first 83% if they don't see you as teachers or consultants or subject matter experts or trusted advisors. It is so, so different today than as recently as 5 or 10 years ago. So this premium content in many cases is taking the place as the proxy for what used to happen in one-on-one conversations, in much the same way that ChatGPT and Copilot and Perplexity and Claude are also proxies for what used to happen in one-on-one conversations. So if we want someone to be excited about scheduling some time to talk with someone from your team about the topics that are in that premium content, you need to over-deliver and get them so excited about what you've provided in the premium content, that they're dying to speak with a human from your team about how they can implement that in their particular company. So that client centricity is incredibly important, knowing who they are, knowing the company that they're from, and knowing where they are in your journey, so in their journey, so you can have full journey coverage. Educate and build trust early and often. Early and often. They're going to go through a minimum of 25 to 30 touch points. In that journey, we want as much surface area as possible with as many people as possible on that full decision committee. And that's the great part with premium content, is when it's so incredibly valuable that the person that originally downloaded that premium content knows that there's other coworkers, other people on their team, other people in other roles on other teams in their company that ought to be reading that as well, that as soon as you prompt them and says, who else should read this? Who else should download this? Who else should see this? We know when it comes to liquid cooling, when we know when it comes to decommissioning, when we know when it comes to physical security, it truly takes a team and typically has stakeholders from this role, that role, this particular job function, that particular job function. So with that in mind, just simply hit the forward button, add a thought or two on why this matters. We know that teams that learn together grow together. So premium content is helping you to proactively drive alignment among stakeholders that you don't even know yet exist. The cool part is when it's gated content, when it's premium content, every person that fills out a form gives you more lead intelligence in your CRM to be like, oh, cool. Another person from the same company is looking at this premium content. And I was really savvy. I asked them, what's your biggest challenge with topic, whatever. And so I'm getting that information at the individual level that I can aggregate into the account level too, to kind of surmise what's going on in that company and on that particular decision committee. So that's what I'd be thinking about for how to attract high quality data center leads by creating premium content. There's a lot of people really messing this part up in the data center ecosystem by trying to prematurely book sales meetings with prospects that are not ready for sales meetings. They're just not. Typically, there's only 5 or 10% of the market is ready for that kind of conversation at any given time. And if you're way too aggressive on trying to close them on the first date, on trying to, okay, it's another crude analogy. Imagine that you're at a singles event, you're at a social event, and you have a particular person that's trying to be very aggressive with trying to advance romantic relationships with people. Like, yeah, don't do the data center sales version of that. Unless you have extremely unusual circumstances, it's very, very, very unlikely that what you're selling is an impulse buy. More than likely, if you try to push them prematurely into a sales conversation, they're going to run away and not trust you. So it's super important that they see you as an expert. Experts don't aggressively try to close people or create a deal on the deals board just because you have some quota or some sales deadlines that you're working on that don't happen to have any remote relevance to their particular timeline. So part of being client-centric is being able to better read the room, read the signals with all of this when it comes to attracting high-quality data center clients by creating premium content. The other huge mindset shift that I started with this as well is historically SDRs, BDRs, AEs, anyone in a sales role or account management role has felt that content was solely the job of marketing. And like 10 years ago, kind of sort of the case, but today where your only ticket back into relevance in the early and the middle stages of the journey is through being seen as an expert, being seen as a teacher, as a trusted advisor, it's incredibly important that you have some role in shaping and distributing an involvement in premium content and educational events. And if you don't currently have that, that is a culture issue that needs to be addressed at your executive level of figuring out a way for your entire go-to-market team to rally together and figure out how you're going to address this big, big, big issue in the marketplace where there's a trust epidemic, and the way to earn your way back in that kind of environment and succeed in educating and building trust is to get incredibly client-centric. And the last thing your prospects and clients want to deal with is internal silos where you're all pointing your finger at each other. Hopefully not the worst of the fingers, but they don't want the blame game. They don't want to be treated like a human ping pong ball. It's incredibly important that you all show up as one cohesive team. And that's the reason why even people from your sales and account management role need to have some involvement in that premium content strategy and shaping that content. And for sure, at the minimum, anyone that's client facing better be reading at least the Cliff Notes version of that, because the last thing in the world you want is a prospect or a client coming in that's consumed all your premium content and they know your premium content better than you do. That's like a credibility destroyer. So if there's some of that going on in your organization right now, that needs to be addressed as well from a sales enablement context. But that's what I'd be thinking of for attracting high quality data center leads, by creating premium content. If you have an idea for a topic or a question or challenge that you think we should address in an upcoming show, be sure to leave that in the comments on whatever platform you're watching, and we'll add your idea to the consideration queue to possibly address in an upcoming show. So how do we engage data center decision committees by leveraging educational events? How do we engage data center decision committees by leveraging educational events? That is a fantastic question. Okay, so we're going to kind of work backwards on the wording here. We're starting with the word events, because I find when I talk to most people in the data center industry, when they think of events, they think of either attending, sponsoring or exhibiting at, or speaking at someone else's events. There's very, very few people, very, very few companies that when we first start talking about events, that they're immediately thinking of anything but someone else's events, because they think vanity metrics matter. They think the more warm bodies there are, the more badge scans there are, the more people there are in the mobile app, the better it's going to be for their company. And if there's a very high match rate between that event's demographics, who they attracted last year and who they think they're going to attract this year, and your ideal client profile and your core buyer personas, it can be a reasonably good use of your time if you're educating and building trust. If you're in the top 3% of people at that event who's actually getting to educate and build trust from the stage, the other 97%, it's a mixed bag. We spend actually a lot of time cleaning up messes that are created by over-investing in ICP malpractice, basically forgetting to ask the tough question of like, hey, did their demographics last year and their forecasted demographics this year even remotely line up with our ideal client profile and our prioritized buyer personas, let alone the whole idea of, is there someone from my company that's actually going to get to educate and build trust at that conference? So that, unfortunately, is the default configuration. It messes up a lot of people, because when you're on this hamster wheel where twice a month, 12 months of the year, 25, 26 weeks out of the year, you're living out of a suitcase, and for 3 or 4 days before, it's all about preparing for that, and for a couple of days afterwards, it's all about recapping and decompressing and ready for getting, you're to the point where like 45, 50 weeks of the year is either at or preparing or de-preparing or debriefing from that. Like, how is there time to do actual work? There isn't. So like, there is high opportunity cost with over-investing blindly without understanding that high ICP match and the ability to educate and build trust. So let's talk about educational events that are the opposite, where you're actually in a position where nearly everyone that's attending has a high match rate with your ideal client profile and your targeted buyer personas, and you're actually getting to educate and build trust. That's called hosting your own events. And a lot of people think it needs to be crazy expensive, because they're thinking that an event needs to have a couple hundred or a couple thousand people or tens of thousands of people to be worthwhile. I call bullshit on that whole, call BS on that whole idea that you need hundreds or thousands of people for that event to be worthwhile. No, you need the right people in the room from the right companies that are in the right job roles. And most of all, they need to be there for the right reasons. You didn't bribe them by taking them to the Super Bowl or the World Series. You didn't take them on a yacht trip or on a tropical vacation or something. No, they are there to learn from your subject matter experts. They are there for you to do a transfer of education that results in some trust building. So it feels a lot more like professional development and learning and development. And when you're really dialed into that ideal client profile, when you know exactly where these accounts are located, when you know how big or small these companies are, when you know what industries they're in, that helps you build a great targeted account list to fuel things like account-based marketing, ABM, account-based selling, account-based experience, ABX, whatever you want to call it. And then within those accounts, truly understanding who the 2 or 3 most important categories of stakeholders are, of economic buyers that show up on these decision committees. The most important one we call the primary buyer persona. The second most important one we call the secondary buyer persona. If you're selling to relatively small companies, segmenting into 2 or 3 different kinds of groups is usually more than adequate. If you're selling to enterprises, don't be surprised if you need to segment into at least 5 or 10 different roles to truly nail that. So a lot of it depends on how big your company is, how big their company is, in terms of how to truly understand who's on the decision committee. But the cool part is when it comes to your particular topic and it comes to targeted accounts, when you get in the rhythm of like, okay, you've discovered there's 10 or 12 big goals and challenges for each of these 2 or 3 buyer personas. I'm going to take each one separately because I know that CFOs don't love talking about IT, and IT people don't love talking about finance, and operations and security people. Like, everyone has their own priorities. That's why when you figure out their top 5 or 10 goals and challenges, you may find a little bit of overlap, but usually it's quite separate. That's the argument for keep these events relatively small and keep them hyper targeted and focused to provide the most value. The good part is, compared to the expenditures, the time and financial that goes into national and global conferences, these cost almost nothing to run. It's all just time. And the more you do them, the better you get at it, the faster you get at it. But in terms of like out-of-pocket budget, do you have access to a conference room or a classroom that seats 15, 20, 30 people? Is it basically free to rent that space? Cool, costs next to nothing. Do you have a CRM, an email marketing program where you can invite people to an event? Yep. Yeah, of course, you're going to need to get together with your sales enablement person, with your marketing folks to come up with the registration landing page and the title and the invitation and the promotional strategy. Yes, that costs time, but purely in terms of out of pocket, we are usually talking about, if it's a breakfast seminar or lunch and learn event or something like that, if you're hosting this in the US for 25, 30 people, 10, 15 people, it's a few $100s. I think you'd have to be hard pressed to spend more than a few $1,000s, even if you had like lavish catering or something like that. But if you're trying to get something off the ground that doesn't have a lot of executive support, but it could have crazy levels of impact. In the US, like, people that run these events as a breakfast seminar, they're literally like bringing in coffee and pastries and some fresh fruit or something like that, or yogurt or something like that for breakfast, or for lunch, they're bringing in like deli or pizza or something like that, or salads. Like, this does not have to be super lavish. They're not coming for the free food. If they were, it wouldn't be an educational event. It would be the bribe event, and you'd be taking them to the Super Bowl or the World Series or on a yacht or to Bali or Cannes or something like that. No, they're coming to learn from your experts about a topic that is incredibly top of mind, front burner for them. How do you know what those topics are? Because you did your homework. You asked them, you figured out what they are struggling with, what's in their objectives and key results, what's going to get them promoted if they get right, what's going to get them the opposite of a promotion if they get wrong. And you've aggregated this together, and you're being extraordinarily client-centric in your approach to leveraging educational events. If you have the luxury of your prioritized buyer personas at your target accounts being able to drive to your office, facility, data center, whatever it is where you're hosting these events, and they're within a 30 or 60 minute radius, host these events in person. If you don't have the luxury of the proximity, host these events online. At this stage, most people for sure know how to attend and participate in a webinar. The challenge is, can your value proposition be strong enough that they're motivated to want to attend? Now, we know, regardless of whether these are free in-person events or virtual events, you very, very rare to get 100% attendance rate. It's far more likely, especially for a free event where there's no skin in the game, that you're contending with an attendance rate. So as a result, always record these events, always make the slides available. We always know that there's people that really, really wanted to be able to attend, but something came up at the last minute, unavoidable conflict, and they want to be able to watch the replay or go through the slides. When you do this well, and there are decision committees, the whole idea is that someone comes up to you and says, oh, you know what? Bob and Sue, they really needed to be here. And our VP, she needed to be here as well. Can you ever like the recording the slide so I can share it with my coworkers? Like, yeah, absolutely. That'd be awesome. So this is how you get to the decision committee. And then the next time around, your goal is to invite more and more people, keep inviting the whole decision committee. This is where, from like a tactical perspective, account-based marketing, like whether it's they're already in your CRM or you're using outbound or LinkedIn ads, LinkedIn campaign manager. If you really have big budgets, you could certainly do the next level on account-based marketing tools. But the whole basic idea is that when we have a lot of clarity about that ideal client profile, and we have a great target account list, and we know exactly who the buyer personas are that we want to educate and build trust with, one by one, invite those couple hundred, those couple thousand people to your monthly breakfast seminar, your monthly lunch and learn, your monthly webinar installment. And the idea is that by providing great value, they're going to be a lot more responsive to, hey, who else from your company should also attend? And that's where you start to have multiple people from the same company, from that decision committee, learning and growing together, and you're proactively driving alignment and transforming and shaping their beliefs about your particular category in the formative stages of their journey, while you still have a chance to impact how they do all of this. So in terms of engaging decision committees by leveraging educational events, that's what I'd be thinking about early and often. And for sure, it needs to be educational in nature. You already know coming into this that most of your buyer personas are very technical, they're very skeptical, they're very sales allergic. It doesn't take them much for the sales allergies to start popping up. So be extraordinarily respectful of that and make sure that you're over delivering on value and dial back the pushy commercialism. Because if you really want to win them over, it's about educating and building trust, not trying to close them on the first date. So that's what I'd be thinking about for when it comes to educating data center decision committees by leveraging educational events. We're going to take a real quick break for a message from our sponsor. Then we're going to come back and address 3 more of the biggest go-to-market sales and marketing challenges that we're hearing about throughout the data center ecosystem.
Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that's www.dcsmi.com. Now, back to Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A.
Hey there, Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute, and you're watching the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. If you're enjoying what you've seen so far in this week's show, be sure to hit the like button, help us spread the word. And if you have an idea for a topic or a question or a challenge that you'd like to see us address on an upcoming show, be sure to leave that in the comments and we will add your idea to the consideration queue of upcoming episode topics. So what is up next? Next, we're going to talk about how to create a data center lead generation strategy for mid-market and enterprise clients. How to create a data center lead generation strategy for mid-market and enterprise clients. So what's super important about that lead generation strategy is that we focus on the full journey. What does that mean? Most of the time, when people are talking about lead generation, what they really mean is late stage lead generation, or what's often sometimes called early stage opportunity generation, meaning that your salespeople only want to talk to the hottest of hot leads that are ready for a sales conversation, which can be a really, really big mistake if no one from your company has had the opportunity to be involved in the early and the middle stages of that particular prospects, of that particular account's research and decision making. Because in a world where typically that sales conversation only happens when they're almost ready to buy, if we only start to get involved in shaping how they look at your category when they're almost ready to buy, in most cases, it's too late. And it's like that pop song from the 1970s with Carole King, "Too late, baby, now it's too late," that we really did try to sell that data center space. No, I think it's, well, we really did try to make it. It's actually, if you listen to the lyrics, it's a sad song. It also was a very popular song. But at any rate, I don't want you to arrive too late. It's super, super important that we're generating leads early, and we're generating leads in the middle of the journey, and that we're generating leads in the late stages of the journey. We need full coverage, because if we don't, someone else that you compete with directly or indirectly, or even a non-business model competitor that's also interested in that topic, is going to intercept them and shape their beliefs about your particular category. So when it comes to mid-market and enterprise clients, the first question is, how confident are we in our sense of product market fit and go-to-market fit? In other words, how strong is our understanding of our products and services and why people buy, and the price points and the frequencies? And in other words, is your company at a mature stage where you've scaled and you've sold dozens of these deals, hundreds of these deals, thousands of these deals? There's dozens, hundreds, thousands of employees. You've gone through many, many iterations of your marketing and sales playbook, or are you still figuring this out? For mature, established companies, it is very likely that you will have a different team and a different playbook for mid-market and enterprise. Why? Because the IT department of a company with a few hundred employees is doing things very different on a daily basis than the IT department of a company with tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of employees. For starters, there's a lot more people in the IT department, and the roles tend to be a lot more granular and segmented the bigger the entity is. For a much smaller company, like let's say you have a co-location business, a co-location operator business, and your company has 2 or 3 facilities, 2 or 3 locations, and you have a few dozen employees. Well, once you get beyond a company with 1,000 or 5,000 employees, it's very possible that you're so past the point where you can help that kind of client that it doesn't matter if they're mid-market or if they're enterprise. They're just in a bucket where really it has to go all the way to the owner, where it has to go all the way to your CTO, because your existing playbooks, your existing templates are just really not optimized for mid-market or for enterprise. So again, a lot of it depends on your context, your resources, your sense of product market fit, and whether you've successfully done this dozens, hundreds, thousands of times. For a much larger company, it's very likely that you have a different team and a different playbook, a different part of your website, different event strategy for mid-market versus enterprise, because there's vast differences in the deal size, and there's vast differences in the length of the sales cycle, and there's massive, massive differences in the number of stakeholders that need to weigh in. So when it comes to that lead generation strategy, it's super important to think about the segmentation. Typically, if most of your clients are in a relatively narrow size band, a lot of times the segmentation is done by either shared behaviors or job roles or a little bit of both. It's entirely possible, if you're a large enough company where you're massively distinguishing between lead gen into mid-market versus lead generation into enterprise, that you also are looking to segment by who the stakeholder is, or what the behavior looks like for that particular decision committee member, depending on whether they're from a company with a few hundred employees or thousands or tens of thousands of employees. So again, when it comes to your lead generation strategy for mid-market and enterprise, it usually starts with having a real strong understanding of that ideal client profile, where you're doing business, where your clients are located, how big or small they are in terms of headcounts, like the low end of the range, the upper end of the range. Are we going to segment that range based on some of them being the definition of mid-market versus enterprise? By the way, if you ask a whole bunch of people, like, what's the difference between mid-market and enterprise, I don't know that there's really a universal definition about where the top of small business stops, where the top of small business stops and the bottom of mid-market starts, and where the top of mid-market stops and where the bottom of enterprise starts. For most people, the general consensus would be mid-market is usually a few hundred. It could be a few thousand. Once you get to several thousand, or certainly 10,000 plus, that's almost universally considered mid-market. So all I'm saying, it's super important, if there's a lot of strong opinions in your company and a lot of people have worked at different companies before they came to your company, it's worth documenting in your wiki or wherever you document your ideal client profiles and your playbooks, what size company is considered mid-market and what size company is considered enterprise. For sure, you'll need to make these decisions in your CRM with how you do filters and how you do segmentation and workflows and notifications and everything like that. But yeah, make sure that this is part of your sales onboarding. Make sure that this is part of your own internal professional development, not just your annual sales kickoff kind of events, but throughout the year. So everyone has a really good idea of what the definition of mid-market is and what the definition of enterprise is. And many times that'll get reinforced by case studies, where you say that, okay, these case studies are mid-market case studies. These case studies are enterprise case studies. But like I said before, if you have a big enough team, it's very likely that you're segmenting the teams based on company size that you're selling into, because there's such big differences in unit economics and deal sizes and the amount of stakeholders that are involved. And as a result of that, many times it's a much more experienced account executive, enterprise account executive, that gets hired, as opposed to a mid-market executive, as opposed to an SMB, small and medium-sized business. account executive and sales development rep. So the target market and the unit economics and the sophistication and the needs of that account a lot of times dictates what you do with hiring, what you do with the playbook, what you do with segmentation, certainly what you do with supporting lead generation. Once you get past small and medium-sized business and you're into mid-market and enterprise, usually ideas like account-based selling, account-based experience, account-based marketing become super popular and having a much focused effort onto who was working specific named accounts. And then it's a matter of truly getting as much of the right kind of surface area and those accounts as you possibly can. And what most people severely underestimate in the data center industry is not just how many stakeholders weigh on a particular initiative, but a lot of times they are completely in the dark about those stakeholders even existing. Many times you'll never meet those hidden or silent stakeholders that ultimately get a vote in it, like, for example, in finance or compliance or something like that. And again, like, not only did those folks not want to meet with you, many times you may not even know their names or know they exist, but you know how you influence them? Your thought leadership, your lead generation content, your premium content, because that's what arms your internal champion to be able to forward this around to get buy-in among other team members. And if you think that this is a nice to have in the world that we live in now, that was a nice to have 10 years ago. Now, without having that kind of content that your internal champion can forward around to the people that you don't even know exist, is the difference between you staying on a short list versus you being knocked out as not being sophisticated enough and not being prepared to work with a company like theirs. Massive, massive impact on being able to stay in the game. And where I see a lot of people in the data center industry losing prematurely on this is a lot of times such a huge part of their resources are going to huge events and huge media properties that don't line up especially well with their ideal client profile, that there's a huge opportunity cost, a massive distraction factor in not being able to provide enough resources, enough premium content, enough thought leadership where it matters most among your tier 1, tier 2, mid-market and enterprise target accounts. So for your lead generation strategy for mid-market and enterprise, make sure that you truly understand and are able to prioritize and rank the different kinds of stakeholders that show up on those decision committees by their economic impact for every single one of those important stakeholders. Make sure that you're as client-centric as possible in understanding their goals and challenges. Make sure those goals and challenges are lined up with where they tend to show up throughout the journey, and make sure that there's a lead generation strategy, an intentional lead generation strategy that gives you full surface area, that gives you full coverage early and often throughout each of those journeys. So, so incredibly important. Next up, how do we close sales faster with our data center leads using trust building strategies? How do we close sales faster? Sales cycle acceleration, deal speed, deal velocity with our data center leads using trust building strategies. A lot of people in the data center industry are massively confused about what it takes to build trust. A lot of people think trust happens on the expo floor in the booth. It doesn't hurt it, but it's usually not sufficient by itself. If you're going to invest very, very aggressively in booths and having footprint in exhibit halls, expo halls, at major data center conferences, what is incredibly important is not the badge scans, but what you do with the badge scans afterwards. Because right now, most of the time, depending on the level of sophistication among your marketing ops people, those leads are handed off to the sales team. And the problem is the sales team is under incredible amounts of pressure to immediately qualify and generate deals and get ROI from that conference. The reality, though, is 95% of the people that visited your booth, even if they're a perfect fit, are not ready for a sales conversation. But they went to the conference presumably to learn, to keep their skills sharp, to learn how their peers are addressing some of their biggest goals and challenges around data centers and digital infrastructure. The flex from your part for getting in there early and often is education and trust building, meaning that as long as this particular event has a high match rate relative to your ideal client profile and prioritized buyer personas, which I don't want to take for granted because a lot of conferences have a really crappy match rate relative to your ideal client profile and prioritized buyer personas, but hopefully you're doing a good job on your diligence and you're only participating, attending, exhibiting, speaking, sponsoring out, investing aggressively in conferences where their demographics line up well with your demographics. As long as that's the case, there's every reason to believe that the quality of the badge scan supports investing in being part of those booth visitors' education, part of their professional development, part of their learning and development. So what I would be looking to do to close sales faster with those leads using trust building strategies, if you're hell bent on stepping on the gas as hard as possible with these events, is immediately inviting them to a multi-part education and trust building educational experience that leans on who they are, where they are in the journey, and what is where the biggest pain is, what the biggest struggles and challenges are, what their biggest goals are. Now, that can be an extraordinarily inefficient process if you don't have a good match rate at the conference, and it can be a very painful process if you're trying to change over the company culture in the 7 or 10 days in between the two conferences. I'm not saying this to be snarky or sarcastic, but like for a company that's going to 25 events of the year, with those 25 events of the year, a couple days before, a couple days after, a day of travel on each side, 2 to 2.5 weeks for every single event. Multiply 2 to 2.5 weeks times 25. I think that's more than 52. I could be wrong. So where are you finding time in between the events to run your own events that actually educate and build trust, even if you're executing flawlessly? This is where so many companies are falling down on opportunity costs, where they're spread too thin. Now, if you work for a Fortune 1000 company, you have a deep enough bench that you're able to rub your belly and pat your head really, really well at the same time for 52 weeks out of the year, then keep doing what you're doing. But if your company's below like 500 employees, below 200 employees, and you're trying to run and keep up with the big, like the distraction factor is very, very real for what needs to actually be done in the modern journey and in the AI-driven journey to build trust, to educate and build trust with your most important core buyer personas. That's the reason why, for the better part of a year or two, we've been telling people to start making some tough decisions and look at where you were for the last 12 months with these and figure out what the bottom 20% is at the absolute minimum, because you need that time and resources from the bottom of the 20% to actually compete in the real battleground, not where you think the actual battleground is. The battleground that many companies are chasing is not the real battleground. Nearly all of their effort is going into the last 5%, that last 17%, that last 12%, and completely asleep at the wheel, completely invisible, completely ghost town, and all of the early and middle stages of the journey. So when it comes to closing sales faster with your data center leads using trust building strategies, it's so incredibly important to be very, very specific about who these ideal clients are, who's on that target, the companies that are on that target account list, who the prioritized buyer personas are, what's going on in their world. When you know what's going on in their world and you know who's the most important and the second most important, each of them should get a slot on your educational events schedule. So primary buyer persona is maybe the first week of the month. Secondary buyer persona is the second week of the month. Obviously, you're going to want to experiment with days of the week and times of the day and everything to optimize around attendance. But the basic idea is this is not one and done. This is early and this is often. So when I say monthly series, I literally mean monthly series. Discover those 10 or 12 big goals and challenges is systematically once a month for the next 10 or 12 months. If you want to be able to close sales faster, keep encouraging people from your target accounts to come participate in your company's professional development and learning and development initiatives. So you're able to educate and build trust with multiple stakeholders from those companies. That's the single most transformative strategy that you can invest in to build trust and close sales faster with the right people in the right accounts, especially conducive to decision committee formats. For many companies, this is a really big culture change that needs to start from your top down. because if you're used to marketing and selling like it's still 10 years ago, 15 years ago, like thinking that there's going to be a resurgence of the fax modem or the dial-up or the BlackBerry or MySpace or some other crazy stuff, like there are legitimately people that have with a straight face conversation with me. They're like, our prospects and clients, they don't buy this way. Like, what do you mean they don't buy this way? They don't have smartphones? Oh no, they have smartphones. They're not like addicted to using their smartphones constantly. Oh yeah, they use them constantly. They've never heard of ChatGPT or Copilot. Oh no, they use those all the time. They've never watched a YouTube video or gone to a webinar. Oh, they don't like marketing people very much, but yeah, we're pretty sure they're using all that to figure things out. So like, if they're using all of that to figure things out and you're not part of how they're figuring things out, you're not building trust. You're open for a miracle. If you want a much, much more predictable path to closing sales faster, better deal velocity, better trust building strategy, the last frontier that you can influence in a world where they're trying extra hard to bypass you with ChatGPT, the last frontier, the last surface area that's actually effective is hosting, promoting your own educational events. And the cool part is you can do it for a fraction of the time and a fraction of the cost of participating in the vanity events where you think you're solving major problems because you're in a room with a couple hundred or a couple thousand people, 90% of which don't line up with your ICP and your prioritized buyer personas. Again, this is a culture shift. Big culture shift. If you ever read the book Moneyball, or you ever saw the movie Moneyball, or you're a fan of Michael Lewis, there is a scene towards the beginning of Moneyball where Jonah Hill and Brad Pitt are in the parking garage. And it's the first time they really get to chat about what eventually becomes this incredibly transformative strategy for Brad Pitt, Billy Beane's team, the Oakland A's, that gets them to like crazy historic records. But anyway, it goes something like this, that baseball thinking is medieval. They're asking all of the wrong questions. They think in terms of buying players, but you don't want to be buying players. You want to be buying wins. And in order to buy wins, you need to be able to buy runs. Data center leadership thinking is medieval. They are asking all the wrong questions. They're thinking in terms of brand exposure and visibility. But in order to grow a business, you actually need revenue. And in order to grow revenue, you need clients. You need the right clients. And in order to generate opportunities and new clients in today's AI-driven environment, you need to be able to educate and build trust. In order to educate and build trust, we need to put ourselves in an environment consistently where we are with the right people in the right places at the right time, and most of all, in the right context. So they say you and your client-facing team members as teachers, consultants, trusted advisors, subject matter experts, perhaps even thought leaders. Your odds of being able to do this when everyone that is in the room is from a target account and everyone that's running this event is rooting for you, as opposed to being conflicted with 99 other companies that bought a bigger booth than you, like the likelihood of you figuring this out, you have so many more at bats when your whole team is rooting for you as opposed to rooting for all of the other guys. This is the key to educating and building trust, is recognizing the self-service journey, the self-driven journey, where nearly all of your technical buyers are now doing a ton of research before they ever get to you. We need to figure out a way to earn our way back in early and often. We can't do that by bribing them. We can't do that by giving them Super Bowl or World Series tickets, or taking them on a tropical vacation, or taking them out on a yacht ride or a fishing trip or something like that. That doesn't educate, and that doesn't build trust. These are transformation projects. These are super smart folks. They see through our nonsense. You're not fooling them. You're not fooling yourself. If we want to truly be able to build trust and accelerate these sales cycles, we need to be there early, and we need to be there often, so that we can educate and build trust consistently in a way that helps them figure out what other people in similar job functions, in similar companies, in their region, at similar sizes and similar industries are doing to tackle this very same goal, this very same challenge that's driving them nuts, that's screwing with their work-life balance, that's messing up their sense of psychological safety, that's standing between them and a promotion, all of the above. The better job we can do with showing up with a subject matter expert from your team that provides world-class educational expertise and value that helps them figure it out, the more they're going to want to keep coming back early and often, over and over and over again. And the more they're going to trust bringing their coworkers and bringing their boss and giving you what you need most badly. Significant surface area and footprint on that decision committee in a way that positions you and your client-facing team members as world-class subject matter experts in your category and everything that's directly and indirectly related to what you do in the data center industry. So that's what I'd be thinking about if you want to close sales faster with your data center leads using trust building strategies. If you've enjoyed this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show so far, make sure that you hit the like button. And if you're in a place where you can rate and review that, we'd super appreciate that as well. And that brings us to our final question for this week's show. How do we integrate data center content and events for better lead generation? How do we integrate data center content? How do we integrate data center events together for better lead generation? That is a fantastic question. And for most companies, the very first place to start is to recognize that in a world where now information is completely commoditized, no one in your sales team is an information gatekeeper the way they used to be 10 or 20 years ago. Everyone now has immediate access to ridiculous amounts of information using the chat app that's on their phone or on their notebook, on their watch. Like the ridiculous instant gratification that they're getting because of generative AI is a real competitive thorn in your side. If you're on a commercial team, on a revenue team, in a sales marketing role, account manager, product kind of role. The way we continue to stay in the game as relevance is we need to be able to provide more value than your prospects and clients can get from these self-service tools. That's why we see so many more companies hiring technical subject matter experts onto business development teams. In other words, people that have never worked in sales earlier on in their career. They had some reasonably good soft skills, project management skills, leadership skills, and now they're incredibly in demand to join sales teams because they have immediate rapport and immediate street credibility with their peers that are largely the same buyer persona that their prospects and clients are. Along the same lines, we see another trend where account executives, especially senior account executives, are becoming way more technical, way more upskilling, way more cross-training, way more professional development than they ever have before in their career. And in many cases, they're striving to get the same kind of training and certification credentials that their prospects and clients have. Why? Out of necessity. Nobody needs you to read the slides to them anymore, read the website to them anymore. They need you to help them solve their problems that they haven't been able to figure out how to solve on their own. And that so far, ChatGPT and Gemini haven't been able to help them figure out how to solve on their own anymore. So against the backdrop of more IT professionals and more engineers being hired onto and highly coveted on data center go-to-market teams, on data center sales teams, and more career sales professionals being forced out of necessity to upskill with the same kind of professional development and learning development that the prospects and clients have. We are in a world now where most account executives and sales development reps and account managers and product managers and marketers need to present a lot more like teachers and consultants and subject matter experts and advisors and thought leaders than someone that just has that traditional job title working for a vendor. In fact, we need to get out of the vendor box, and we need to stay out of the vendor box for good, because if we're locked in the vendor box, we are so screwed. We just are, because there is a marketplace that's going to completely steamroll your value proposition if you're locked in the vendor box. There is a channel partnership that's going to give better unit economics to your CFO and board if you are vulnerable to being steamrolled by commoditization. So it is so incredibly important that we level up in the value that we're able to provide to our prospects and clients as true consultants, as true experts. And as a result, it is incredibly important for everyone on your go-to-market team to be involved in content and involved in events in some way, shape, or form. The more seasoned members of your team who've been in the industry for several years or perhaps several decades, there should be someone in a content and an event role who is constantly trying to interview them or get them to speak at events where they share their decades of institutional knowledge with prospects and clients who are clamoring for clarity in these tremendously tumultuous times of trying to figure out anything and everything that's relevant to AI and everything else that's going on in the data center industry. For people that are more mid-career, pretty much the same value proposition. If you're at the stage where you're like a walking encyclopedia of institutional knowledge, you also need to be in a position where you're constantly being interviewed for content, for podcasts, for webinars, speaking at events, the whole 9 yards. For those that are brand new at the early stages of their career, there's still a great role for marketers and sales development reps and like entry-level account managers, entry-level product managers. Your role, instead of being the expert, you're the tour guide, you're the concierge, you're the moderator, you're the host who makes sure that all this great content happens, that makes sure that all these great educational events happened. Because your company's, your team's survival, your career is extraordinarily dependent on figuring that out. Again, no one needs you to read the website to them. No one needs you to read the deck to them. They can do all that. There's buttons that can do all of that for them. There's tools that can do that for them. The next level of being able to earn our way early and often is they have to see your client-facing team members as some of the top experts on the planet in your category. And when you get to the point that you've executed this so well that you've pretty much, let's say you're trying to go back to everyone internally no more than twice a year, you've used up all of that time slot and you're still not covering as much as you need, then go to your channel partners. They're rooting for you, right? Go to your vendors. They're rooting for you as well with supplying subject matter expertise. Bring in your channel partners and host a panel, host a roundtable. Same thing with your clients. You can mix your clients and mix your prospects together. You can mix your channel partners and prospects and clients together, whatever works better for providing value to them. But when it comes to integrating marketing and events for better lead generation, there was this mindset a decade or two ago that content and events, that the account executives and sales development reps and account managers, they didn't have to worry about it. Marketing would figure it out. Well, I can tell you without a doubt that the marketers that are successful in the space are now full journey and then some, meaning they're involved in awareness and consideration and decision, as well as post-purchase and channel partnerships and product 360 view, full journey and then some. And the sales professionals, whether it's account executives, sales development reps, account managers, so not only are the marketers going way deeper in the journey than they ever have before in their career, sales professionals need to come in much, much earlier in their career than they ever have in the past. Because if you wait to the point where a prospect is ready to speak with you, it's too late. Most prospects, most future clients don't want to talk to someone with an AE or SDR sales title until they're almost ready to buy, at least 83, 85, 90% of the way through that journey. And by then, someone else has shaped the criteria that they're using to evaluate your category because you thought it was marketing's job. No, the silos have to disappear. The pointing fingers at each other has to disappear. The collaboration is incredibly, incredibly important. Client centricity, incredibly, incredibly important. It's the only thing that's going to protect your career, your team, your company from being steamrolled by a generative AI tool that's better, smarter, faster, but still doesn't have the emotional intelligence and still doesn't have the relationship building that you have. So consider this your early warning signs with all of this. If you're not able to provide a higher level of value than your prospects and clients can get from the current GPT with the current AI, as we're not even close to yet with super intelligence or general intelligence, like if at the current level you're struggling, it's time to rethink getting some more experienced IT and engineers onto your team to help supplement things. It's time to have a proactive plan for some of the people that are less technical to upskill, to make good use of that commuting time, that travel time, the gym time, whatever it is, to get a couple dozen hours a year of professional development every year so they can upskill and have better conversations with their prospects and clients, because this is the competitive battleground. It's bizarre to think that you're in competition with the chat apps, but you are. It's a competition for attention. We all know someone at this stage of the point, at point in time, we all have a friend or family member who spends so much time talking to Gemini or ChatGPT or Copilot that it feels they're in a relationship with them. We've all heard the prognostications that we're no more than a generation away from our kids or grandkids having an AI spouse. Like, we know what's coming. We know the exponential value leap that happened between people just being comfortable using voice typing on Google and Siri in like the past 10 years to jumping to where we are today with the chat apps. We know what's coming. So if we are very, very serious about integrating our marketing and our events together for better lead generation, we need to stop putting all of our efforts in that final 17% and recognize that the deals are being won and lost in the early and the middle stages of the game. If you don't show up to the stadium till the game is 83% of the way over, you're screwed. There's no way you're going to, like, it doesn't matter whether you're a football fan, soccer fan, basketball, hockey, baseball. How many games do you know where the other team missed the entire first 83% of the game? They weren't there till the fourth quarter. They weren't there till the eighth inning. They were completely absent, and they had a chance of being able to rally back and win the game. Game's over already. Don't let the game be over already. You need to be in there early and often. This isn't one and done. What I'm very, very concerned about is I see a lot of small to mid-sized companies over-investing and chasing the big guys at extraordinarily expensive national and global conferences where they're very, very, very outmaneuvered. And as a result, there's an enormous opportunity cost in having some of the smartest people on your team be consumed by conference schedules for 40 or 45 weeks out of the year. There's literally no time to do education and trust building with your core accounts unless you have a phenomenally high match rate of your ICP, of your ideal client profiles, actually attending those accounts. And you have phenomenal success in being in the top 3% of that event who actually gets to educate and build trust. Sadly, what I've seen over the last 10 years is there's an enormous amount of those speaking slots that are going to companies that are way bigger than 200 employees and 500 employees. And as a result, like, you're sunk before you got there. You're drowning, you're treading water drowning before you ever got there. So it is really, really, really important to be hyper-focused on understanding this competitive battleground and figuring out exactly who your ideal client profile is, exactly how you're going to reach them, exactly how you're going to provide a ton of value as a professional development and learning development part of their world so that they're highly motivated to want to keep coming back to you and learning from your client-facing team members in a way that allows you to continually educate and build trust and have phenomenal value in the self-service journey with your content, and phenomenal value when one or more stakeholders from that decision committee start attending and participating in your educational events. In terms of like integrating those together, we talked about the team integration. In terms of integrating the content and the events, always, always, always record these events, especially for free events. It is extraordinarily unlikely that you'll be able to get or sustain 100% attendance rate, meaning there's always someone that has something that comes up that precludes them from being able to attend despite their best intentions. So there's always people, I missed it. Is there any way I can get the recording? There's always people that come up to you afterwards and said, you know what, Sally and Raj, they needed to be here as well. Any way I can get a copy of the slides of the recording so I can share it with my coworkers, to share it with my boss? Absolutely. So this is where the content and the events come together, not only for making it available on demand, but repurposing it dozens of different ways, repurposing it into infographics and images and carousels and text posts and email newsletters and medium length videos and short videos and vertical videos. There's dozens of different ways to repurpose that. Again, another way where the marketing and the events comes together. But at the end of the day, we need a lot of surface area when it comes to being actively involved in our most important accounts with the most important people in those accounts in their professional development and learning and development process. If you can figure out a way to navigate your way in early and often to be consistently being the educators, the consultants, the subject matter experts, the trusted advisors, the thought leaders, when it comes to taking up a big, big slice of where they invest their professional development time, their learning and development time, magical things start to happen with winning over multiple stakeholders from that company in your target accounts, winning over one by one more and more surface area in those decision committees. So that's what I'd be thinking about when it comes to integrating data center content and data center events for much better lead generation. If you've enjoyed this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, it is incredibly important that you help spread the word by hitting the like button, and be sure to rate and review us as well. If you have an idea for a topic or a question or a challenge that you'd like to see addressed on an upcoming show, be sure to leave that in the comments, and we'll add that to the consideration queue of topics to consider featuring in an upcoming episode. If you want to make sure that you get invited to educational events just like this and get notified about educational resources similar to this, make sure that you're subscribed to our Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter so you can get notified directly in your email inbox on Sundays. You can subscribe for free directly on our website at www.dcsmi.com. I'm Joshua Feinberg from the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute, DCSMI, and I host the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast. If you and I are not currently connected on LinkedIn and you would like to be, make sure to include in the connection invite note that you're like to watch and that you're a big fan of Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A. We're so glad that you're able to join us for this week's show, Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A. We wish you tremendous success and your team and your company tremendous success in growing your influence throughout data centers, critical facilities, and digital infrastructure. Look forward to seeing you back again next week. Take care now.
Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that's www.dcsmi.com.